Hello and welcome back. We had been dealing with yet another interesting topic and on epistemology, and that was from one of the readings, and that is Johnathan Barnes' paper or article on Epistēmē. We had talked about the preliminary introduction of this article. Now we go ahead with the key aspects of the paper. This is Dr. Ananya Barwa, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now let's discuss about the objective or hypothesis of this article by Johnathan Barnes, Epistēmē. This article examines the vocabulary of knowledge in Plato's dialogues, arguing that the three key knowledge verbs, gignoskein, edene, and episteste, and their corresponding nouns, noesis, episteme, techne, form a structured system that must be understood holistically rather than through one-to-one translation. The study reveals that episteme and episteste are not as closely related in meaning as previously assumed. While episteme is the most general term for knowledge in Platonic Greek, episteste has a more specific usage. A structuralist approach is necessary to grasp the meaning of these epistemic terms in Plato, as translation cannot rely on direct equivalence but must consider systematic relationships. Leon's semantic analysis challenges the traditional epistemic troika. The epistemic troika, by now we understand, is the knowledge that, knowledge how, and knowledge by acquaintance. It is tripartite, so it is called as epistemic troika or three, by showing that Plato's language does not fit neatly into this categorization. So there are certain research questions that can be probed while studying this article. The questions are: how do the different Greek knowledge verbs and nouns relate to each other in Plato's dialogues? Can the epistemic distinctions of modern philosophy, knowledge that, knowledge how, and knowledge by acquaintance, be mapped onto Plato's epistemology? How does a structural semantic approach refine our understanding of Plato's theory of knowledge? Now, the article provides, however, a fresh linguistic perspective on Plato's epistemology, moving beyond traditional classical scholarship by applying modern structuralist linguistic techniques. It argues that the standard tripartite epistemic classification should not be imposed on Plato without a closer analysis of the original Greek texts. The methods used here have been the structural semantic analysis. The study examines how Plato's knowledge vocabulary functions as a system rather than as individual words with fixed meanings. Comparative textual analysis. The research reviews Plato's dialogues, comparing occurrences of the knowledge-related verbs and nouns to establish patterns and contrasts. Historical philosophical review. The work contextualizes Plato's epistemology within the broader history of philosophy and linguistic thoughts. Limitations in methods. It depends on linguistic assumptions. The approach assumes that structural semantics can fully account for meaning without external philosophical considerations. Potential anachronism. While the article critiques modern epistemic categories, it also applies structural linguistic methods that may not align perfectly with ancient Greek thought. Textual variability. Differences in manuscript traditions may influence interpretations of key passages. Data collection and analysis. Corpus analysis. The study systematically categorizes every instance of knowledge-related terms in Plato's corpus. Syntactic and semantic classification. Different grammatical constructions and collocations of the verbs and nouns are analyzed to determine their meanings. Comparative linguistic study. Findings are cross-referenced, while linguistic theories, including those of Chomsky and Lance, frequency of knowledge verbs, occurrences of gignoskin, adenai, and epistestai are the key variables that we see here. The syntactic patterns, how each verb functions in various sentences structures. Semantic shifts, change in meaning depending on collocation with different nouns or verbs. This study provides a deep linguistic and philosophical analysis of Plato's epistemic vocabulary, arguing for a more nuanced interpretation that challenges modern epistemological categories. Significant results or findings we see it in the form of distinctive usage patterns of knowledge verbs. So, gignoskin is the only verb frequently used with a person referring direct object. Epistestai is uniquely associated with an infinitive, suggesting an action-oriented dimension. Adenai predominantly occurs with a that clause, indicating its role in propositional knowledge. The challenges to the traditional epistemic troika, we see that the study refutes the notion of gignoskin to correspond strictly to knowledge by acquaintance, epistestai to knowledge how, and adenai to knowledge that. Both gignoskin and adenai are shown to function across multiple epistemic categories. A structuralist approach to Plato's epistemology. Thus, Plato's knowledge vocabulary forms an interconnected system that cannot be fully understood through direct translation. Semantic meaning is context dependent and influenced by linguistic structure rather than rigid categorization. Interpretation of results. The author interprets these results as a significant departure from past linguistic and philosophical assumptions. The findings challenge previous epistemological readings of Plato, showing that structural relationships between terms dictate their meaning more than fixed definitions. The author also argues that Plato's epistemology should not be forced into modern categories like the epistemic troika without considering its linguistic structure. So, our further approach now would be to understand the broader implications of the findings. We see that the study suggests that Plato's epistemology cannot be neatly categorized into modern epistemic distinctions. This has implications for the interpretation of classical texts and the development of epistemological theories. Linguistic implications, we see that these findings reinforce that meaning in ancient Greek cannot be reduced to direct translation, urging scholars to adopt context-sensitive approaches when analyzing philosophical texts. Applications in real-world settings and future research, again, and the translation studies, the findings can improve the accuracy of translating Plato's works, helping scholars preserve semantic nuances instead of forcing words into modern categories. Philosophy of language, the study's structural approach could be applied to other ancient languages and texts, aiding in the comparative study of epistemology across cultures. Challenges in frequency analysis. The study acknowledges that word frequency alone is not sufficient to determine meaning, as contextual variability plays a crucial role. The study suggests a deeper analysis of verb-noun relationships in Plato's texts. Further work could examine how Plato's terminology evolved over time, particularly in Aristotle's philosophy. So, one unexpected result was that gignoskin does not exclusively signify knowledge by acquaintance. The author reconciles this by arguing that Plato's terminology operates fluidly across categories rather than adhering to fixed epistemic distinctions. So, this study redefines how we understand Plato's vocabulary of knowledge by rejecting rigid epistemic categories in favor of a structural semantic approach. It not only contributes to linguistic and philosophical scholarship, but also opens new avenues for translation, accuracy, computational linguistics, and epistemology. Now, if we are to discuss the background studies referenced or cited, we see that these articles references a range of classical and contemporary works on epistemology and linguistics, including Philosophical Foundations, Gilbert Ryle's 1945-1949 on Knowing How versus Knowing That, Bertrand Russell's On Knowledge by Acquaintance, A.J. Ayer's 1956, Kate Lehrer 1974, D.W. Hamlin's 1970 on Modern Epistemology. We also see the linguistic analysis of Greek epistemology being picked up by John Lyons, 1963-1981, on the structured systematic of Greek knowledge verbs. Charles Kahn, 1966-1973, works on ancient Greek linguistic structures. And the Platonic and Aristotelian scholarship, we have W.G. Runciman's 1962 work on Plato's later epistemology, and Benjamin Mate's 1949 on Stoic logic. However, let's now proceed on to discuss about the gap in this article. The article aims to address two major gaps. First, the imposition of modern categories on ancient texts. Most previous studies, Ryle, Ayer, assumed that Plato's epistemology fits neatly into the epistemic troika. Remember epistemic troika? Knowledge that, knowledge how, and knowledge by acquaintance. The paper challenges this assumption, arguing that Plato's Greek does not conform to these categories. 2. Lack of structural linguistic analysis in classical studies. While Lyons 1963 introduced structural semantics to Platonic studies, many scholars continued to analyze Plato's knowledge verbs in isolation. This article builds on Lyons but goes further by demonstrating systematic relationships between the verbs and nouns. How this paper builds upon or differs from prior research. We see that this article is builds upon and it extends Lyons' structuralist approach, applying it more rigorously to Plato's dialogues. It acknowledges Ryle's distinction between knowing how and knowing that, but refines it with a linguistic rather than purely philosophical framework. And how does it differ? Unlike traditional epistemologists, this article rejects the imposition of modern categories on ancient texts. It criticizes past attempts to classify gignoskin as knowledge by acquaintance and epistēmē as knowledge. That's showing that these verbs overlap in meaning depending on context. Strengths novel linguistic approach. It provides a more accurate understanding of Plato's knowledge vocabulary through structural semantics. Challenges established assumptions. It successfully debunks the epistemic troika as a framework for understanding Plato. Broad impact of translation studies. It offers practical insights for translating Greek philosophical texts more accurately. Weaknesses. Potential over-reliance on structural semantics. While structuralist analysis is powerful, it may downplay the role of philosophical argumentation in shaping Plato's vocabulary. Limited consideration of historical linguistic evolution. The study does not fully address how Platonic epistemic terms evolved in later philosophical traditions. Reliability of findings are based on the methods used. We see that the systematic corpus analyzed of Plato's knowledge verbs ensures robust empirical grounding. However, semantic interpretation remains partially subjective, and alternative linguistic models could offer different insight. Now, if we further talk about the introduction and research objective of this article, we will, as we are reviewing, we see that the paper aims to analyze Plato's knowledge vocabulary, which we have already discussed about gignoskian, adenine, and epistēmē, and their corresponding nouns, gnosis, epistēmē, and techne. It challenges traditional epistemic categories, the troika, knowledge that, knowledge how, and knowledge by acquaintance, showing that these distinctions do not nearly fit Plato's epistemology. The study argues that previous scholars have imposed modern linguistic categories on ancient Greek without considering Plato's internal semantic system. This article has of course been built upon both philosophical and linguistic traditions where Ryle, Russell, Eyre, Lyons, Charles Can and all have been cited. Now we must also see that the two gaps that these article which talks about over-reliance on modern epistemic categories and the lack of structural analysis in classical studies needs to be thoroughly addressed. When we talk about the methods and approach of these articles, we see that the study uses three primary methods: corpus analysis, semantic and synthetic analysis, and comparative linguistic analysis. Now this corpus analysis reveals that every occurrence of gignoskian, adenine, or epistēmē in Plato's work is catalogued and categorized. Semantic and synthetic analysis examines sentence structures to determine how these verbs function grammatically. Comparative linguistic study, it compares Greek epistemic verbs with say voir or connaître with French, Latin, German, say wissen versus kennen, and Russian, and so on and so forth. So the key findings has been that Greek knowledge verbs function differently than expected, and gignoskian is not strictly knowledge by acquaintance. It is also frequently used with propositional knowledge of that clause. It does not primarily mean that knowledge that, but is often associated with skill or ability. Adenine is the most frequently occurring verb with that clauses, but its meaning shifts depending on context. So we see that this article has, it refutes Ryle's strict distinction, which is Ryle's knowing how, knowing that model does not neatly fit Greek epistemology. Plato's use of epistēmē and gignoskian overlaps in ways Ryle's model does not explain. And also it expands on Runciman, 1962. So while Runciman argued that Plato was unclear about knowledge's distinctions, this article argues Plato's terms are systematic but different from modern categories. So the broad implications in philosophy, in translation studies, in computational linguistics of this paper is well seen. Under computational linguistics, it provides insights for AI-driven translation models. For translation studies, this article improves accuracy of translating Plato or avoiding modern epistemic biases. For philosophy, it challenges how we interpret ancient epistemology, shifting focus from concepts to linguistic structures. We had also seen or discussed about the strengths. Let us just quickly break them down. The first has been linguistic innovation, for it uses structural semantics to provide new insights into Plato's epistemology, challenges assumptions, it debunks traditional epistemic categories in understanding Greek knowledge terms, cross-disciplinary impact, it applies findings to translation studies, AI linguistics, and epistemology. Weaknesses, of course, have been the over-reliance on linguistics. The study may underemphasize Plato's philosophical arguments. Limited scope, it focuses only on Plato without extending the analysis to Aristotle or later thinkers. and the findings have been robust, supported by a comprehensive corpus analysis of Plato's work. So the reliability of findings of this article, if we are to talk, we should know that it is a foolproof one. However, semantic interpretations remain partially subjective, meaning alternative linguistic models might offer different insights. The translation constraints again has been something which we did discuss, where to reiterate, meaning cannot always be captured in direct translations. We had also talked about the historical linguistic evolution, where this article does not fully address how these terms evolved in Aristotle's works, and biases towards structuralism, that is, the study assumes that meaning is primarily linguistic, which may downplay philosophical context. Now, extending the analysis to Aristotle and Stoic epistemology, comparing Plato's knowledge terms with non-Greek philosophical traditions, example Indian and Chinese epistemology, could also be one of the future research directions. Applying computational linguistic techniques to study meaning shifts in ancient texts could yet be the other research directions. And the paper revolutionizes the study of Plato's epistemology by rejecting a modern epistemic categories in favor of structural linguistic approach. It challenges long-standing assumptions in classical scholarship and opens new pathways for interdisciplinary research. Now, as we are closing the review of this article of Johnathan Barnes' Epistēmē, the question that occurs is how the structural linguistic approach is used in Plato's epistemology. Now that we have discussed the entirety, let us quickly focus on this aspect. This article applies the approach to Plato's knowledge vocabulary, particularly the Greek verbs vis-a-vis, gignoskin, which is to perceive, to recognize, to come to know; edine, to know factually, to be aware of; epistēstē, to understand thoroughly, to master. So instead of assuming that these verbs directly correspond to modern epistemic categories, the trioka, the study argues that these terms must be understood in relation to one another rather than in isolation. Plato's use of knowledge verbs is systematic and context dependent, meaning their meanings shift based on grammatical structure. So, previous scholars misinterpreted Plato by imposing modern epistemic distinctions on ancient Greek vocabulary, and impact on philosophy and linguistics. The troika, as we all understand by now, is a Russian word meaning a group of three. So troika is a reiterating term when we are discussing Epistēmē of Johnathan Barnes, and it originally referred to a three-horse carriage, but is now commonly used to describe any powerful or significant troika. In different contexts, of course, this article is powerful from political usage. This term, troika, a ruling group of three leaders or officials. General usage, any set of three closely related things. Maybe in our Indian philosophy, we will be more comfortable with the triguna, the rajas, tamas, and the sattvika. Epistemology knowledge theory, it refers to the threefold distinction in knowledge: knowledge that, knowledge how, knowledge by acquaintance. So propositional knowledge, practical knowledge, direct knowledge, the troika. Thus, the epistemic troika refers to the traditional three-way diversion of knowledge in modern philosophy, and it improves understanding of Platonic texts. Translation should be context sensitive rather than relying on fixed meanings for Greek knowledge terms. It bridges philosophy and modern linguistics by using structural semantics. The study offers a fresh interdisciplinary perspective. We also see that a structural linguistic approach provides a more accurate and nuanced understanding of Plato's epistemology, showing that Greek knowledge verbs function within a complex system rather than adhering to rigid modern epistemic categories. This method revolutionizes the study of ancient philosophical texts and has implications for translation, linguistic theory, and epistemology. And last but not the least, thus these epistemic troika refers to the traditional three-way division of knowledge in modern philosophy, and the translation for it improves understanding of Platonic texts, and translation should be context sensitive rather than relying on fixated meanings for Greek knowledge terms, and this approach enhances accuracy in interpreting Plato's dialogue. So we understand that the epistemic troika is thus the traditional three-way division of knowledge in modern philosophy, TROIKA, troika, and it challenges the traditional epistemic troika. The study rejects the idea that Plato's epistemology fits neatly into knowledge that, knowledge how, and knowledge by acquaintance. Instead, it suggests that Plato's knowledge concepts are more fluid and structurally dependent. And we had just about mentioned that the troika, the context, though it's a Russian word and it's a group of three, but it originally had referred to a three-horse carriage, but is now commonly used to describe any powerful or significant trio. And definitely epistemic troika in Johnathan Barnes' work Epistēmē makes a huge comeback, where we have been analyzing or talking about the troika, the propositional knowledge, the practical knowledge, the direct knowledge, knowledge that, knowledge how, and knowledge by acquaintance, by asserting how they are not how they had been used. And Johnathan Barnes needs to be appreciated for giving us this fresh look about epistemic troika and how we can deal with in this article. Thank you so much.